It was just another scorching summer afternoon at the Highway 65 rest stop outside Memphis, where the air shimmered with heat rising from the asphalt. The kind of day where most people would hurry from their air-conditioned cars to the comfort of the rest stop building, barely noticing their surroundings. But not Officer Wilson. Those years in the Marines had permanently rewired his brain, making him notice everything, whether he wanted to or not. As he pulled his weathered pickup truck into a parking spot, the familiar scent of hot rubber and exhaust fumes filled the air. His dashboard clock showed 3:47 p.m., that awkward time between lunch and dinner when rest stops usually emptied out. Yet today, something felt different. He couldn't put his finger on it, but years of combat experience had taught him to trust his gut. Wilson stepped out of his truck, his boots hitting the pavement with a soft thud. His eyes automatically began their practiced scan of the surroundings, a habit that had saved his life more than once overseas. The rest stop was relatively quiet. A couple of long-haul trucks idling in the back lot, their drivers probably catching some much-needed sleep, and a few family cars scattered around. He noticed how the summer heat had dried out the small patch of grass near the picnic tables, turning it into a crispy brown carpet. A forgotten newspaper tumbled across the parking lot, dancing in the hot breeze. The scene looked ordinary enough, but that uneasy feeling in his stomach wouldn't go away. Walking towards the building, Wilson adjusted his baseball cap, a faded blue one with the Marine Corps emblem he'd worn so long it felt like part of him. The sound of cicadas filled the air, their endless drone mixing with the distant hum of highway traffic. His hand unconsciously touched the phone in his pocket, another habit from his service days. Always be prepared, always have a way to call for backup. The rest stop building itself was typical. Beige concrete walls, metal doors, vending machines humming away under the entrance overhang. Wilson had stopped at hundreds of places just like this during his cross-country drives. They all started to look the same after a while, but that's what made the unusual things stand out even more. As he approached the entrance, he noticed how the security camera above the door was tilted at an odd angle, probably knocked askew by recent storms. That detail registered in his mind automatically, just like the number of vehicles in the lot, the position of the exits, and the faces of the few people moving between their cars and the building. Inside his head, Wilson could still hear his old drill sergeant's voice. "Your eyes are your best weapon, son. They'll tell you what's wrong before your brain even knows it." Those words had saved his life more than once in the service, and even now, years later, they kept him alert. Something about this ordinary rest stop on this ordinary afternoon wasn't sitting right. He paused near the vending machines, pretending to study the snack options while his eyes continued their careful sweep. The fluorescent lights inside flickered slightly, casting moving shadows that made it harder to focus. But Marines were trained to see clearly even in the worst conditions, and right now, all of Wilson's senses were telling him to stay alert. Little did he know, his training was about to prove valuable in ways he never expected. As he stood there, seemingly absorbed in choosing between chips and candy bars, fate was about to put him in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Sometimes, being observant isn't just a habit. It's the difference between life and death for someone else. The first thing Wilson noticed was their reflection in the vending machine glass. A young girl and an older man standing near the restroom entrance. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. After all, families stop at rest areas all the time. But something about this pair made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The girl looked to be around 15 or 16, wearing a purple hoodie despite the summer heat. Her shoulders were hunched forward, making herself smaller, like she was trying to disappear. The man beside her was probably in his 50s, dressed in pressed khakis and a polo shirt that seemed too crisp for someone who'd been traveling. His hand rested on the girl's shoulder in what might have looked like a protective gesture to others, but Wilson saw the slight dig of fingers, the way the girl winced when he squeezed. Through the reflection, Wilson watched their interaction while pretending to count change for the vending machine. The man was doing most of the talking, his mouth moving quickly, head bent close to the girl's ear. She nodded mechanically, her eyes fixed on the floor. It reminded Wilson of the way frightened civilians looked in war zones, present in body, but mentally somewhere far away. What really caught his attention was the contrast between them. Not just their age or race, but their body language. The man was too controlled, too aware of his surroundings. His eyes darted around constantly, checking exits, scanning faces. It was the look of someone who knew they were doing something wrong. Meanwhile, the girl's movements were robotic, rehearsed, like someone had programmed her responses. Wilson fumbled with his quarters, deliberately dropping one to get a better look. As he bent down to retrieve it, he noticed the girl's sneakers, scuffed and worn, with a small tear near the toe. But what struck him was the fresh price tag still stuck to the bottom. Who buys shoes and doesn't remove the price tag? It was another small detail that didn't add up. The air conditioning hummed overhead, mixing with the distant sound of trucks on the highway. A family with young kids burst through the entrance, their laughter echoing off the tiles. Wilson noticed how the man's grip on the girl tightened at the sudden noise, how he shifted slightly to keep her partially hidden behind him. Through years of training, Wilson had learned that dangerous situations rarely announce themselves with sirens and flashing lights. Instead, they reveal themselves through tiny details. A nervous glance, a tense muscle, a silent plea for help. Right now, every detail about this pair was screaming that something was wrong. He watched as the man checked his phone, his movements sharp and agitated. The girl swayed slightly on her feet, and Wilson caught a glimpse of dark circles under her eyes, visible even under carefully applied makeup. She looked exhausted, but not the normal tired of a long car ride. This was the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who hadn't felt safe enough to really sleep in days. Other people walked past, absorbed in their own journeys, their own stories. A truck driver headed to the coffee machine. A mother herding 3 kids toward the restrooms. An elderly couple studying a map. None of them seemed to notice anything amiss. But Wilson couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching something sinister unfold in broad daylight. The scene before him was like a photograph with something wrong in the background. The kind where everything looks normal until you spot the detail that changes everything. Wilson had seen enough bad situations in his life to know that doing nothing wasn't an option. But he also knew that rushing in without a plan could make things worse. Whatever was going on here, he needed to be smart about how he handled it. Wilson started walking past the pair, moving slowly, casually, like just another traveler heading to the restroom. That's when it happened. A movement so subtle he might have missed it if he hadn't been watching so carefully. The girl's right hand dropped to her side, and in that brief moment, she made a gesture that stopped his heart. Her hand rose slightly, palm facing outward. At first glance, it looked like she was just letting her arm hang naturally. But Wilson knew better. Her thumb was tucked into her palm, her fingers folded down over it. He'd seen this signal before. It had been all over the news and social media recently. A silent way to ask for help, created for people who couldn't speak freely. A modern SOS that could be used right under an abuser's nose. Time seemed to slow down. Wilson remembered watching a training video about this signal just a few months ago. The instructor had emphasized how it might look like nothing to untrained eyes, just a casual hand movement. But for those who knew what to look for, it was as clear as a scream for help. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a truck's air brakes hissed. Wilson kept walking, maintaining his casual pace while his mind raced. The girl had clearly learned this signal somewhere. Maybe from social media, maybe from school. She was aware enough to use it, brave enough to try. Now the question was, how could he respond without putting her in more danger? He could feel the weight of his phone in his pocket, like a lifeline. But he couldn't just pull it out and start dialing. Not with a man watching everyone so carefully. One wrong move could make the situation much worse. The girl had taken an enormous risk just making that signal. He needed to honor that courage by being smart about his response. Through the windows, he could see cars pulling in and out of the parking lot. Each one represented a possible escape route for the man if he got spooked. Wilson needed to keep them here, keep them in this public space until help could arrive. His military training kicked in. Assess the situation. Identify resources. Plan your approach. The girl made the signal again, this time while pretending to brush her hair back. Her eyes flickered up for just a split second, meeting Wilson's in the reflection of a nearby window. In that brief moment, he saw everything: fear, hope, desperation. Then her gaze dropped back to the floor, but he'd gotten the message. She was counting on him. Someone had taught her this signal for exactly this kind of situation, and now she was using it, praying someone would understand. Wilson's mind flashed back to his combat training. The most dangerous moments were often the quietest ones, where one wrong move could change everything. This was just like that. A silent battle playing out in a public space. The man's hand was still gripping the girl's shoulder, his knuckles white with tension. He was scanning the room constantly, like a predator watching for threats. The rest stop bustled with afternoon activity. A cleaning cart rattled past, its wheels squeaking on the tile floor. The smell of coffee drifted from the small cafe area. Everything looked normal on the surface, but Wilson felt like he was standing on a powder keg. One spark could set everything off. He needed to act, but he also needed to be smart about it. The girl had been brave enough to send out this silent SOS. Now it was his turn to be brave and careful. Whatever happened next would depend on his ability to respond without alerting the man. Lives had been saved before because someone recognized this signal. Today, he had the chance to add one more to that list. The vending machine hummed quietly as Wilson pretended to study the snack options. Row after row of chips and candy bars became his cover as he watched the situation unfold in the reflection. Years of military training had taught him to observe without being obvious, and right now, every detail mattered. He noticed how the man's expensive watch caught the fluorescent light, too fancy for his worn-out rental car keys. The girl's clothes were new, but didn't quite fit right, like they'd been bought in a hurry. Her phone was missing. Teenagers always had phones, but this girl's pockets were empty. Each detail added to the growing picture in Wilson's mind. A group of truckers walked past, their boots heavy on the tile floor. The man's reaction was instant. He pulled the girl closer to the wall, positioning himself between her and the passing men. It wasn't the protective move of a concerned parent. It was the calculated action of someone afraid of losing control of a situation. Wilson shifted his position, moving to the coffee machine for a better view. The girl's responses to the man's quiet commands were mechanical, rehearsed. When he whispered something to her, she nodded exactly 3 times, like she'd learned that was the expected response. Her eyes stayed fixed on the same spot on the floor, never wandering, never making contact with anyone else. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, creating long shadows on the floor. In the harsh light, Wilson could see faint bruising around the girl's wrist, poorly hidden by her sleeve. His jaw tightened, but he kept his face neutral. Getting angry wouldn't help. He needed to stay calm and think clearly. He watched their interaction in the window reflection, noting how the man kept checking his phone, growing more agitated with each glance. Whatever schedule he was on, something wasn't going according to plan. The girl swayed slightly on her feet. Exhaustion, dehydration, or both. She hadn't touched the water bottle the man had bought from the vending machine. Through the windows, Wilson could see the parking lot. The man's car, a rental based on the sticker in the window, was parked at an odd angle, backed in for a quick exit. The license plate was partially obscured by dirt, but Wilson's trained eye caught enough to memorize it. Every detail could matter later. A mother with 2 small children approached the vending machines. Wilson noticed how the girl's eyes followed them briefly, a flash of something. Longing? fear, crossing her face before she caught herself and looked down again. The man's grip on her shoulder tightened, his knuckles turning white. The air conditioning clicked on with a loud hum, making the girl jump slightly. The man leaned down, whispering something that made her shoulders hunch even further. Wilson recognized that posture. He'd seen it in war zones, in people who'd lived too long under threat. The body curling in on itself, trying to become a smaller target. Time was moving strangely now, too fast and too slow all at once. Wilson needed to make decisions, but he couldn't rush. One wrong move could spook the man, send him running with the girl to somewhere less public, less safe. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical thing. This wasn't like his military missions, where he had a team backing him up. Right now, he was all this girl had. Wilson's fingers closed around his phone, his mind racing through options. He needed to call for help, but he couldn't just stand there dialing 911. The man was too alert, too watchful. One suspicious move could send him running with the girl. Moving casually, Wilson headed toward the coffee station, keeping the pair in his peripheral vision. The coffee machine gurgled and steamed, providing perfect cover noise. Wilson pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages while actually dialing 911. His heart pounded, but his hands stayed steady, just like they had in combat situations. The dispatcher's voice came through, calm and professional. 911. What's your emergency? Wilson kept his voice low, measured, like he was having a normal phone conversation. I'm at the Highway 65 rest stop, just outside Memphis. He stirred his coffee slowly, making it look natural. There's a situation here that needs immediate attention. He described what he was seeing: the man, the girl, the SOS signal, the rental car, all while appearing to be totally absorbed in fixing his coffee. The dispatcher understood immediately, asking smart questions that Wilson answered between sips of coffee and casual glances around the rest stop. His military training kicked in as he provided crucial details: the man's height, build, clothing, the partially visible license plate number, the girl's description, their exact location in the building. Through it all, Wilson maintained his casual pose, just another traveler taking a break. But his senses were on high alert, noting every movement, every change in the situation. The man was getting more agitated, checking his phone more frequently. Something about his schedule wasn't working out, and that made him dangerous. Units are already en route, the dispatcher assured him. Can you safely stay on the line? Wilson mumbled a yes while pretending to add cream to his coffee. Years of training had taught him how to hold a phone discreetly, how to talk without moving his lips much. He watched in the chrome coffee machine's reflection as the man checked his watch again, his other hand still gripping the girl's shoulder. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, and Wilson could see cars pulling into the rest stop parking lot. Any one of them could be the police, but he knew they'd arrive quietly, without lights or sirens. They'd need to handle this carefully to keep the girl safe. A truck driver walked past, nodding hello. Wilson nodded back, maintaining his casual appearance while updating the dispatcher in quiet murmurs. They're still by the vending machines. The man keeps checking his phone, getting anxious. He kept his voice calm, controlled, just like he'd learned to do during tense operations overseas. The air conditioning hummed overhead, mixing with the usual sounds of the rest stop. Doors opening and closing, footsteps on tile, the distant rumble of highway traffic. Wilson used these normal sounds as cover for his conversation with dispatch, timing his words carefully. The girl shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clearly tired. The man's grip never loosened. Wilson could see the marks his fingers were leaving on her shoulder. Everything about the scene made his combat instincts scream, but he forced himself to stay calm. He'd learned in the Marines that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is wait for the right moment. Help is almost there. The dispatcher's voice came through quietly. Just keep them in sight if you can do so safely. Wilson knew the next few minutes would be crucial. He needed to keep them here, keep them visible, give the police time to arrive. But he also needed to stay unnoticed, just another face in the crowd. The girl had been brave enough to signal for help. Now it was his turn to be brave enough to do this right. As minutes ticked by, Wilson knew he needed to do something to keep them at the rest stop. He could see the man getting more restless, checking his watch, glancing toward the exit. Help was on the way, but they needed more time. Taking a deep breath, Wilson grabbed his half-empty coffee cup and walked toward them, adopting the lost traveler look he perfected over years of real road trips. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice friendly and tired sounding. "Been driving for hours and my GPS keeps giving me weird directions. You folks know if there's construction up ahead on 65. He positioned himself carefully, not too close, but directly between the man and the nearest exit. The man's grip on the girl's shoulder tightened slightly, but his face showed a forced smile. "Haven't seen any," he answered shortly, clearly wanting to end the conversation. But Wilson wasn't about to let him off that easy. "You sure? Because my buddy just texted me about some major backup near the state line." Wilson pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages. He noticed how the man's eyes darted to the phone, then to the exits, then back to Wilson's face. The girl stood completely still, barely breathing. Wilson launched into a long story about his last road trip disaster, complete with wrong turns and closed roads. He kept his body language open and friendly, just another chatty traveler sharing road stories. But his position wasn't random. He was blocking the quickest path to the parking lot. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Wilson talked about alternate routes and traffic patterns. He could see the frustration building in the man's eyes, but social pressure kept him trapped in the conversation. Walking away from a friendly stranger would draw attention, exactly what the man didn't want. "My daughter here isn't feeling well." The man tried to interrupt, his voice strained. "We really need to get going." The lie came easily to his lips, but Wilson noticed how the girl flinched slightly at the word daughter. "Oh, not feeling well? There's a urgent care clinic just 2 exits up. Can't miss it. Let me tell you exactly how to get there." Wilson launched into detailed directions, watching the man's frustration grow. Each second they stayed put was another second closer to help arriving. Through the windows, Wilson caught glimpses of new vehicles pulling into the parking lot. Regular cars, nothing marked, nothing obvious. But his trained eye noticed how they parked, strategic positions, blocking potential escape routes. Help was positioning itself, but they needed just a little more time. The air conditioning kicked on with a loud rattle, and Wilson used the noise to cover his slight step closer, still chatting about local roads and clinics. The man was trapped in the social dance. He couldn't shove past without causing a scene, couldn't simply walk away without seeming suspicious. "Actually," Wilson continued, pulling up his phone's map, "let me show you exactly where that clinic is." He held out his phone, forcing the man to either look at it or obviously refuse. Another small trap in this careful game they were playing. The girl's eyes flickered to Wilson's face for just a moment, and he saw understanding there. She knew what he was doing. The rest stop's normal afternoon activities continued around them. People walking to and from their cars, the cleaning cart rattling past, the vending machines humming. But beneath this ordinary scene, an invisible clock was ticking. Wilson kept talking, his words a careful net holding the man in place, buying precious seconds with each meaningless story about traffic and road conditions. The change happened so smoothly that most people in the rest stop didn't even notice. One moment, everything was normal, just the usual afternoon crowd of travelers coming and going. Then suddenly, there were new faces scattered throughout the building, appearing so naturally it seemed they'd been there all along. A woman in a blue windbreaker browsing the vending machines. A man in jeans and a polo shirt studying a map near the entrance. 2 more people quietly chatting by the coffee station. To untrained eyes, they looked like any other travelers. But Wilson recognized the subtle signs, the way they positioned themselves, their controlled movements, the almost invisible earpieces. He kept talking about road conditions, watching the man's growing agitation. The hand gripping the girl's shoulder was white-knuckled now. Wilson could tell he sensed something too. That animal instinct that tells you when you're being surrounded, even if you can't see it happening. Through the windows, more vehicles had appeared in the parking lot. Nothing marked, nothing obvious. Just regular cars that happened to be parked in perfectly strategic positions. The net was closing, but these crucial moments were the most dangerous. Like a cornered animal, people could become unpredictable when they felt trapped. The girl stood absolutely still, barely breathing. But Wilson saw the hope in her eyes as she noticed the subtle changes around them. Her shoulders straightened just slightly, preparation disguised as a simple shift in posture. She was smart. She understood what was happening. The afternoon sun caught the glass doors as they opened, bringing in another traveler. This one moving with the unmistakable purpose of someone used to taking charge of situations. His casual clothes couldn't hide his command presence. The man holding the girl noticed too, his eyes darting between the newcomer and the exit. Wilson kept his voice steady, still pointing at his phone map, but he'd shifted his stance. Ready. The man was looking for an escape route, but everywhere he looked, he saw another casual traveler who somehow blocked his path. The trap had closed so gradually he hadn't even felt it happening. The air conditioning clicked off suddenly, leaving a moment of notable silence. In that quiet, the leader of the operation moved forward, his voice calm, but carrying absolute authority. "Sir, we need to have a conversation." Simple words that changed everything. The man's reaction was instant. His hand tightened on the girl's shoulder as he tried to back away. But there was nowhere to go. Every casual traveler had transformed, their relaxed poses becoming ready stances. The woman from the vending machines, the man with the map, the coffee drinkers, all moving with coordinated precision. Time seemed to slow down. Wilson saw the man's free hand start to move toward his pocket. But before he could reach whatever he was going for, two of the undercover officers had him. Their movements were smooth, professional, almost gentle, designed not to cause panic among the real travelers in the rest stop. The girl was immediately surrounded by female officers, their bodies shielding her from view, their voices soft and reassuring. The whole thing happened so smoothly that a family walking through the rest stop barely looked twice, just a small commotion easily ignored. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, catching the quick flash of handcuffs. The man's protests were quietly but firmly silenced. Wilson watched as the girl was gently led to a private area, female officers still surrounding her protectively. The terror in her eyes was fading, replaced by something that looked like the beginning of relief. The rest stop's small office had been transformed into a temporary safe space. The girl sat wrapped in a blanket someone had brought from their car, her hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate that one of the female officers had bought from the vending machine. Her shoulders had finally relaxed, the tension of constant fear beginning to melt away. The truth came out in quiet pieces, shared with gentle female officers who knew exactly how to listen. She'd been at the mall with friends, just a normal shopping trip 3 days ago. The man had approached her wearing a store employee badge, saying there was a problem with her friend's car in the parking lot. It was a lie, of course, but she hadn't known that until it was too late. Wilson watched through the office window as more officers arrived. They worked quietly, professionally, keeping the scene calm to avoid frightening other travelers. He learned that the man was already wanted in connection with similar cases in 2 other states. The rental car, the new clothes, the missing phone, all part of a pattern they'd seen before. The girl's parents were already on their way, breaking every speed limit with a police escort. They'd been searching nonstop since she disappeared, working with law enforcement, posting on social media, praying for exactly this kind of miracle. When they got the call that she'd been found, they dropped everything and jumped in their car. Outside the office, the rest stop continued its normal afternoon routine. Travelers came and went, most of them completely unaware of the small miracle that had just happened in their midst. The man had been quietly removed through a side door, away from curious eyes. Now he sat in the back of an unmarked police car, his carefully constructed facade finally crumbling. The girl's phone was found in the rental car, turned off and hidden under the seat. Along with it, officers discovered evidence connecting the man to other missing person cases. One small rescue was turning into something much bigger. Wilson overheard officers talking about search warrants, additional charges, ongoing investigations. A young female officer brought the girl another hot chocolate, this one with extra marshmallows. She'd been the first to approach the girl after the arrest, and now she stayed close, offering quiet support. They'd learned the girl had seen the SOS hand signal on a social media video just a few weeks ago. She'd practiced it in her mirror, never thinking she'd actually need to use it. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the rest stop windows when a car screeched into the parking lot. The girl's parents burst through the door, their faces showing every hour of worry and fear from the past 3 days. The reunion happened in the small office, away from prying eyes, just a family holding each other, crying, laughing, healing. Wilson watched from a distance as he gave his statement to the officers. He told them about noticing the small details that seemed wrong, about recognizing the SOS signal, about choosing to stop and help. The officers nodded knowingly. They'd seen too many cases where people noticed something wrong but chose to mind their own business. As the sky outside turned purple with sunset, Wilson saw the family leaving together, the girl wrapped in both her parents' arms. She looked different now, taller somehow, more present. As they passed by, she caught his eye and gave him a small nod. It was a tiny gesture, but it carried the weight of everything she couldn't say out loud. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of that afternoon at the rest stop spread far and wide. What started as one rescue quickly grew into something much bigger. The evidence found in the man's rental car led investigators to uncover a larger trafficking operation. One by one, more missing person cases were solved, more families reunited with their loved ones. The girl's story, shared with careful protection of her privacy, began making its way through news outlets. The focus wasn't on the trauma, but on the hope. How a simple hand signal, learned from social media, had saved her life. Soon, schools across the country were teaching the signal in safety classes. Parents were learning it alongside their children, practicing it together, hoping they'd never need it, but feeling stronger for knowing it. Wilson found himself invited to speak at police departments and community centers. He'd stand in front of groups, his voice steady as he explained what he'd noticed that day. The small details that didn't add up, the importance of trusting your instincts, the power of just paying attention. He always ended his talks by reminding people that you don't need special training to help someone in trouble. Sometimes, just being willing to get involved is enough. The rest stop installed better security cameras and improved lighting in the parking lot. Other highway stops followed suit, creating better lit, safer spaces for travelers. Small changes, but important ones. The girl's parents became advocates for safety awareness, working with organizations to help other families whose children were missing. Their pain had turned into purpose, their fear into determination to help others. Social media, which had taught the girl the SOS signal in the first place, now filled with videos teaching others how to recognize distress signals and what to do if they saw them. The girl's brave action had started a movement. More and more stories emerged of people being rescued because someone recognized their silent call for help. In police departments across the country, training programs were updated to include lessons learned from that day. Officers shared stories of other rescues, other moments where alert citizens had made all the difference. The message was clear. Everyone could play a part in keeping their community safe. Wilson kept the newspaper clipping about the case tucked away in his wallet. Not because he wanted to remember the fear of that day, but to remind himself that ordinary moments can become extraordinary when you choose to act. Sometimes he'd stop at that same rest stop during his travels, and he'd notice the changes, the new cameras, the better lighting, the safety information posted on the walls. The girl went back to her life, surrounded by the love and support of her family. She started speaking to small groups of her peers, sharing her story to help others stay safe. Her voice, once silenced by fear, grew stronger with each telling. She didn't let what happened define her. Instead, she used it to help others find their own strength. 1 year after that afternoon at the rest stop, Wilson received a letter. Inside was a simple thank you card and a small keychain with a blue ribbon. The message inside was brief, but powerful. Thank you for noticing. Thank you for caring. Thank you for acting. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. He added the keychain to his keys, a daily reminder that sometimes the biggest acts of courage start with simply paying attention. The story became more than just a rescue. It became a lesson of the power of community, about the importance of looking out for each other. In a world that often feels disconnected, it showed how one person's decision to get involved could create a chain reaction of positive change. The ripples from that single afternoon continued to spread, touching lives in ways that no one could have predicted.